They were still laughing when the rifle chose me, and everything that followed could be traced to that moment, when I raised a rusted relic, and the world paused like a breath held too long. A heartbeat later, the tin can in the demo pit blew apart like a comet skipping off a star, and I realized the universe enjoys a bad joke as much as anyone, especially when the punchline is me. If I had been smarter, I would have put the thing down and walked away, but I was short on credits, long on pride, and the crowd had already decided I was a fool, which meant I had something to prove. The auction house on Polly's 9 smelled like old oil, hot wires, and spilled status. The elites perched in a tiered bowl of luxury boxes that glowed in the smoky dark, each box like a private constellation where money lounged and gossip rotated. Down on the floor, where people like me stood elbow to elbow, a conveyor slid wreckage across a graded stage while the auctioneers sang numbers and insults with the same cheerful rhythm. I had drifted there because rumors said he occasionally sold the good stuff by mistake, and my luck had not died yet, even if it was coughing. When Lot 42 clanked onto the stage, nobody saw a miracle. It was a long thing with flaking finish, cables slack, a cracked side plate that showed a glimpse of copper veins. The auctioneer called it a doorstop and added a joke about doorstops being more useful. Laughter rippled up to the boxes and back down like a tide. I felt my ears heat. I did not own much anymore, but I still had a talent for betting on disasters. I lifted my hand and offered the price of a cup of bad coffee. A few heads turned, eyes bright with the pleasure of watching someone they did not know make an obvious mistake. The hammer fell with a clack that sounded like destiny, or maybe just cheap wood. A handler shoved the rifle at me across the barrier with the kind of look normally reserved for contagious rashes. It was heavier than I expected and warmer too, as if it had a fever. My palms came away gritty. I almost laughed at myself, because of course it was warm, the lights were volcanic and hundreds of bodies breathed the same used air. Still, the thought kept whispering that the heat came from the rifle itself. The old man who had been lurking by the cargo crates drifted closer like a memory. His eyes were clouded, pupils gone to milk, but his smile was sharp and knowing. He leaned in until I could smell metal and tea. He told me that I had no idea what I had just bought. Then he melted into the jostling crowd before I could ask what he meant. The auctioneer moved on and the conveyor churned. I slipped toward the back where a demo pit waited for the few buyers who could not resist pressing buttons. The pit was a dented bowl of sand and old target frames. I told myself it would be smart to see whether the rifle could still make a spark. If I resold it as scrap, I wanted to at least know whether I could describe its death honestly. The rifle had a stubby charge port, and a coil that looked like it would fall off if I glared at it. I checked the chamber and found a single round that looked like it had been carved by a nervous jeweler. I said a small prayer to the saints of not exploding and pointed it at a tin can on a stand. The first squeeze almost broke my finger. The trigger felt like a reluctant handshake. A dry pop and nothing. A spray of taunts from the bleachers as a few curious elites decided to watch me fail for sport. I shook the rifle like a stubborn vending machine. The second squeeze kicked like a mule possessed by an angel. The can did not just fall, it became a ripple of light and dust that drifted across the pit. The laughter changed shape, less amused now, more uncertain. The rifle settled in my hands with a content weight, and I realized my heart was racing like I had sprinted up a mountain. One of the floor guards took a step toward me and then thought better of it. I nodded to no one in particular, and told myself to stop smiling before someone robbed me. Word spread with the speed only gossip and venom know. By the time I reached the loading docks, 3 different gamblers had offered to buy the rifle at 10 times what I paid, which mostly told me I had still underpaid. I turned them down because desperation makes people brave and stupidity makes them stubborn, and I was a festival of both. Outside, the night was a purple bruise over the city. Shuttle lights stitched it with lines of cold fire. I found a junkyard 2 levels down, a sprawl of twisted hulls and cracked screens behind a fence whose alarm was purely decorative. I eased through a gap and made a kind of nest between a toppled cargo frame and a pile of dismantled loader arms. The rifle sat across my knees, old and improbable. I tried to convince myself that the can had been rigged, that the demo pit had hidden effects to keep buyers entertained. But the memory of heat and kick would not fade. I stripped off the cracked plate to see the heart of the thing. Instead of the tired guts of a museum piece, I found dense braids of copper and something darker that shifted when I tried to focus. Every smuggler knows the look of illegal tech. This had that look, the way gravity has a look when it leans on you. I slid the plate back and decided that tonight I would not die of curiosity. I did not sleep much. The junkyard creaked with thermal sighs and the distant thunder of reactors. I kept expecting footsteps that never came. When pale morning leaked into the yard, my slate buzzed with a priority push from every screen in the city. The champion's gauntlet was back. The broadcast showed a spinning crown of arenas stitched together like knives around a core station. The announcer spoke with the bright cheer of a funeral director. Undefeated, unchallenged, the champion returns. General Corvain. Prize pool eclipsing the GDP of small moons. Open entry, no questions, sign your waiver and kiss your ancestors. I had seen the gauntlet before, always from the safe distance of someone with no legitimate access and insufficient stupidity. The crowd loved it because it was a reminder that no matter how advanced the galaxy became, nothing beat a good spectacle. The elites loved it because it turned fear into profit. I did not love it, but I knew what credits like that could buy. It could buy passage out of the kind of life where you sleep in junkyards and hope security is too bored to bother you. It could buy a fresh name and the right stamps and all the right registers. It could buy time. I propped the rifle against my shoulder and talked to it because sometimes you have to say the foolish thing out loud to hear how foolish it is. I told it that if it could make a can vanish, maybe it could make an obstacle or two go away. I told it that if it exploded, at least my debts would end neatly. I told it that I was tired of letting other people write the joke and leave me as the punchline. The rifle did not answer. It did hum a little. That might have been my nerves. On the way back to the main lifts, I cut through the market to buy a battery pack and a strip of field tape. A woman at the stall recognized me and laughed the way a cat laughs at a mouse that thinks it is a hawk. She asked if the miracle gun made breakfast as well. I said it only cooked cans. She offered to place a bet on me in the gauntlet with odds so long they needed a telescope. I told her to save her money. She said the fun part of a bad bet is telling the story later. I left with the tape and the kind of blessing only half meant. The parade of fools formed up behind the entry gates, and I discovered that the line was less a queue and more a rolling museum of poor life choices in armor. On my left stood a gene sculpt named Brick by his friends and probably Slab by his enemies, his shoulders so wide he needed to turn sideways to fit through a standard door. On my right, a woman in a suit of kite and plates traced hex patterns in the air while muttering to her swarm. Ahead, a thin duelist polished a blade until I could see my doomed face reflected in it. I tried not to look like a tourist with a relic on his shoulder, and the kind of booths that begged to slip off ledges. Overhead, the stands were already howling. Every laugh sounded like a bet made against my pulse. A trio of arena handlers marched past handing out last-minute advisories that sounded like jokes. Do not fall into the grinder pits. Avoid contact with electrofoam. If your limbs detach, please remain calm until a medic arrives. Brick asked if he could keep a detached limb as a souvenir. The handler said that depended on whether it still worked. I tightened the field tape around the rifle plate and pretended I belonged here. The weapon felt heavy but alert, as if it were a dog that had not decided whether I was its owner or its next meal. I checked the magazine even though I knew it would not calm me. One round sat there, too clean for a junkyard find. The entry horn cried out and the floor lurched forward, carrying us into a tunnel lit by stuttering strips. We jogged, we jostled, we traded the strained humor of people who knew that in a few minutes the world would try to edit us out. The tunnel opened onto a staging platform that overlooked the preliminary course. From here the gauntlet revealed its theater of tasteful cruelty. A field of moving plates crossed a gulf, each plate shifting like a sliding puzzle. Phalanxes of turret drones nested on pylons, their muzzles sweeping in patient arcs. Beyond the plates rose a forest of skeletal towers linked by trembling bridges. Somewhere under all that was the hum of machinery ready to drop a floor out from under you just for sport. In the very center, a tower thrust upward like a needle, and in that tower a viewing pane glowed. The champion was there, or would be in seconds. The platform shook as gates across the field snapped open to release targets shaped like animals, soldiers, and nightmares, all designed to distract the weak or cocky. A host in a silver jacket floated up in a grav harness to deliver the opening remarks. The crowd settled into a hush that was not respect so much as appetite. "You know the rules," the host said in a voice that could sell both soap and war. "Survive the plates, earn points by tagging targets, do not die on the bridges, and if you see a red flare, dive. Last one across is eliminated or memorialized depending on how you look at it." Cameras blossomed like flowers around us. My throat went dry and I discovered I had forgotten how to swallow. The klaxon sounded and the first wave went out in a sprint. Brick took 2 plates at a time, roaring like noise could outrun bullets. The chitin woman sent her swarm ahead, and the drones tried to burn a path through it. The duelist danced as if the floor obeyed him. I stepped onto the first plate, and felt it slide away like a bar stool after too many drinks. The rifle pressed against my shoulder, the stock warm. I picked a rhythm because rhythm is the only friend you have when the ground is unreliable. 3 plates forward, 1 to the left, a pause when the turret muzzle passed, then 2 quick jumps. Shots cracked the air around me, punching dents in the plates. Someone behind me screamed in a way that meant they had already left their day behind forever. I raised the rifle and took a breath I could not spare. The target nearest me wore a caricature of armor with a painted grin. I squeezed and the round left with a sound that did not belong to gunfire. It was lower and deeper and felt like a decision. The target jerked as if a wire had been yanked from its heart. The point tally over my head nudged upward. That should have been satisfying. Instead, it felt like stepping onto ice and hearing it sing. I nearly missed the next plate. The host shouted delight into the air, something about our underdog showing teeth. I wished the host would trip over a cable. Halfway across the plates, a hazard I had not noticed revealed itself. Jets in the seams coughed out curls of electro-foam that danced upward in charged ribbons. Someone landed in it, and every muscle in his body decided to quit at once. I used the backwash heat from a turret burst to push a curl away, then jumped over the next seam with a prayer to friction. The woman in chitin sailed past me on the back of her swarm like a queen on a living carpet. She glanced at my rifle with the expression of someone watching a tame thunderstorm. The far edge of the plate field rose like a lip into the tower forest. As I clambered up, the crowd made a new noise, softer, almost respectful. That could only mean one thing. I looked toward the central needle and saw a tall figure step to the pane. The glass shaded to keep us guessing, but even behind it the champion had a gravity that pulled eyes and bets alike. General Corvain stood with the patience of a statue that knows it will outlive the building. He did not wave. He simply watched. I felt my spine try to straighten as if it owed him that courtesy. The bridges swayed in a lonely wind that probably came from venting ducts designed to imitate drama. Chains rattled. Below, the floor yawned with the promise of sudden reinvention. I moved on to the first bridge and the world narrowed to rope under my hand and slats under my boots. A drone as sleek as a shark glided up to taste my fear. I raised the rifle again, whispered please as a habit not a belief, and fired. The drone folded as if its batteries had all remembered to die at once. The bridges ahead shivered and then, because this was the gauntlet, and timing is a comedian, a section tore free. A crush of contestants spilled like beads and the ones behind them tried to claw back onto the lives they had been in a second before. I flattened myself to the ropes, felt splinters bite my cheek, and held. I made the next tower by promising my knees a vacation they would never receive. At the base, a stack of shock mines waited like silver berries. The duelist was already there, and had cleaved the arming wires with insulting elegance. He smiled at me with generosity I did not trust and told me to step where his boot prints were. I thanked him and did exactly that because I am not allergic to staying alive. Above us, a flock of wasp drones poured out of a vent and the chitin queen rose to meet them, her swarm hissing like rain on a burner. Thunder rolled through the structure. A chunk of tower sheared away somewhere deeper in the course. The host whooped about an unscheduled surprise. Of course there was a surprise. I pushed through a maintenance hatch and found myself in a narrow catwalk tunnel where the noise outside became a dull heartbeat. For 10 seconds there was quiet enough to notice the small things. The metal skin of the rifle vibrated under my palm as if in sympathy with the world. A tiny light on the side that had been dead now pulsed faintly. When I exhaled, the pulse steadied as if listening to my breath. I told myself the weapon was just a clever relic with quirks left by some long-gone engineer. I did not believe me. The knock came long after the arena's noise had faded into the hollow quiet of the barracks. It was not the polite rap of a visitor or the heavy pound of security. It was a small, careful tap like a thief unsure whether to wake the house. I had just started convincing my muscles to forgive me when the door slid open without waiting for my answer. 3 figures stepped inside, masked in matte black and moving with the soundless certainty of professionals who had done this before. They did not speak, did not hesitate. One of them raised a shock baton and lunged. I rolled sideways off the bunk, the rifle already in my hands because I had made a habit of keeping it close enough to touch in my sleep. The first blow glanced off the wall where my head had been. The second attacker came in low, a glint of a knife in hand. I squeezed the trigger without thinking. The shot was not the bright bark of the arena, it was quieter, almost intimate. The attacker jerked backward and was gone before I registered where the round had landed. The other 2 froze for a heartbeat too long, maybe startled by the sound, maybe startled that I had fired without aiming. The air was suddenly thick with something metallic and wrong. My vision swam for a moment, as though the world had bent around me and snapped back. I took a step forward, but the second attacker bolted for the door, dragging the last one with him. The corridor swallowed their retreat in seconds. I stood there shaking, my pulse so loud it drowned the silence. The rifle was warm again, warmer than it had been in the arena, as if it had pulled heat from somewhere it should not have. My knees buckled and I sat hard on the bunk, the weight of the weapon across my lap like a live animal catching its breath. There was a smear of something dark on the floor where the first man had stood, but no body, no gear, nothing that could prove they had been there at all. An hour later, when I had convinced myself to stand and lock the door, the calm on my wrist pulsed. The ID tag was unmarked, the signal routed through enough relays to make a tracking attempt useless. A voice came through, old and rasping, familiar from the auction floor. The blind appraiser spoke my name like it was a secret. He said he had seen the feed from the preliminary round, and he knew I had used the rifle. Then he told me to meet him on maintenance level 17 before sunrise if I wanted to know why that was a problem. I thought about ignoring him. I thought about sleeping and letting my questions go unanswered. But when you survive something you were not supposed to, curiosity can be as strong as hunger. The maintenance levels were never meant for tourists. The air smelled of coolant and long-dead fires. Pipes sweated condensation in the dim light, and the hum of machinery was the only constant sound. I found him leaning against a crate, his clouded eyes fixed on nothing but somehow still tracking me. He was shorter than I remembered, wrapped in a coat that might have been older than the station itself. Without preamble, he called the weapon by a name I had never heard. Widowmaker. The word seemed to hang in the air like it weighed more than speech should. He said it was one of 7 prototypes built during the First Stellar War by engineers who had been too clever and too cruel for their own good. It was designed to never miss. The rounds were not bullets in the usual sense but guided slivers that could bend through space to strike the most vital point of a target, even through cover. And it had no safety switch, no override, because it was not meant for the battlefield. It was meant for executions. I asked how it worked, and he shook his head. The truth, he said, was worse than the rumor. The rifle did not use energy from cells or powder. It used energy from its wielder, pulling life like thread from a spool. A short shot might cost a few minutes, a precise one could take hours or days, and a desperate one could take everything in a single squeeze. That was why it had been banned, hunted down, and supposedly destroyed after the war. Each kill made the user weaker, but it also bonded the weapon to them, so that no one else could fire it without suffering the same toll. I asked him why it had not killed me yet. He smiled without joy and said maybe it liked me, or maybe it was just patient. Before I could ask more, the lights flickered and the hum of the machinery deepened. Footsteps echoed down the corridor. The old man slipped into the shadows without sound, leaving me alone with the sudden certainty that I was about to have company I did not want. A pair of security officers rounded the corner, but their uniforms were wrong, too clean, too crisp. One of them smiled and asked politely if I would come with them for a quick interview about last night's incident. My grip on the rifle tightened. They noticed. The polite one sighed, the other reached for his holster, and I made my choice. The shot left the barrel like it knew its destination better than I did. The second man dropped before he could draw. The first one turned to run, but he never made it 3 steps. I staggered against the wall, my breath ragged, my hands tingling. My comm buzzed again, this time with a brief text from an untraceable sender. They know. I returned to my barracks to find the door forced open and my few belongings scattered. Someone had searched the place with surgical precision. Nothing was missing except the spare battery pack for the rifle and a packet of ration chips. That last detail was almost insulting. I stuffed what I could into my satchel and left before anyone else could try their luck. The tournament schedule put me against 2 seasoned veterans in the next round, both of whom were favored to make it to the finals. I considered withdrawing, selling the rifle, and disappearing into some forgotten corner of the galaxy. But the image of Lady Celine's sharp smile came back, along with the way the champion had nodded toward me from the tower. Backing out would not keep me safe now. The only way forward was through. The quarter-final arena was smaller but crueler. The obstacles were arranged to force us into close quarters where hesitation would be punished immediately. My first opponent was a heavy gunner with armor that looked welded onto his bones. He laughed when he saw my rifle, a dry, mocking bark that made the crowd cheer. I fired once. The round slipped past the overlapping plates of his chest piece, and he crumpled like paper. The second opponent was smarter, using the cover of moving barricades to keep me guessing. He got close enough to slash my shoulder with a vibro blade before I lined up a shot. The rifle pulled harder this time, and for a moment the arena tilted sideways in my vision. When it cleared, he was down and the crowd was roaring. In the med bay afterward, the tournament doctor patched my shoulder and frowned at my vitals. He said my blood pressure was low, my pulse erratic, and asked if I had taken any experimental stimulants. I told him no, which was true in a technical sense. He warned me that another match like that could put me in real danger. I thanked him and walked out before he could insist on more tests. In the corridor, I spotted one of Celine's agents watching me from the far end, his expression unreadable. He turned away before I could decide whether to approach him. That night I sat in the empty mess hall with the rifle laid across the table. The hum was back, faint but steady. I found myself speaking to it in a low voice, asking what it wanted from me. The meeting with the champion was not held in some gilded hall or under the spotlight of 1,000 cameras. It happened in the dim underbelly of the arena, in a service corridor that smelled of scorched lubricant and ozone. A guard with the kind of build that made walls seem decorative told me to wait, then stepped aside. General Corvain emerged from the shadow with the slow precision of a man who had never once been rushed in his life. Up close, he was taller than he appeared from the tower, his frame wrapped in armor that seemed grown onto him rather than worn. His face was a map of scars that looked less like wounds and more like trophies. He studied me for a long moment without a word, his eyes flicking to the rifle and staying there. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but deep enough to make the air hum. He told me to withdraw. No insult, no mockery, just a statement of fact, like telling someone to step out of the path of a falling building. He said the weapon I carried had killed better men than me, and the people who wanted it would not stop at the arena gate. Then he stepped aside and let me walk past without trying to block me. That, somehow, was worse than a threat. I carried his words into the next day, but they did not stop me from showing up for the semifinals. The course this time was rigged in ways so obvious it was insulting. The first hazard was a narrow gauntlet of collapsing platforms over a pit venting corrosive gas. The smell hit before the sight of it, a stinging acid tang that clung to my tongue. I watched two competitors rush ahead only for the platforms to give way under them, dropping them screaming into the green haze. My turn came and I moved with deliberate care, the rifle balanced across my chest, every step a gamble. Midway through, the hiss of a hidden valve signaled another trap. The gas surged upward, licking at my boots. I had to jump, landing hard on the next plate. My knee nearly buckled, but the shot I took at a turret above was perfect. The weapon seemed to guide my hands, and the drone erupted in sparks before it could fire. The crowd above roared, but I could feel the rifle's toll in my bones, a cold seep that settled in my muscles. At the edge of the hazard zone, medics pulled two scorched bodies from the pit. One was still moving barely. I pushed on, into a sector of spinning walls that shifted like puzzle pieces, slamming together with enough force to turn anyone caught between them into a smear. Timing became everything. I waited for a gap, sprinted, and ducked into a wedge just as the walls closed behind me. The air in there was stale, carrying the faint copper scent I was beginning to associate with the rifle. I took another shot at a moving target, and the same strange pull behind my eyes returned, stronger this time, leaving my vision blurred for a heartbeat. At the far end of the course, the crowd's attention shifted as Lady Celine appeared in her private box, her silhouette framed in gold light. She leaned forward, elbows on the rail, studying me through some kind of viewing lens. Even at that distance, I could feel her attention like a weight. When I cleared the final obstacle, she stood and clapped slowly, deliberately, in a way that told me she was not congratulating me so much as claiming me for herself. Her agents were waiting near the exit tunnel, their smiles sharp and false. One of them stepped forward and spoke softly enough that the cameras would not catch it. He said her offer still stood, that I could walk away now with more wealth than I could spend in 3 lifetimes, if I just handed over the rifle. I told him I would think about it, and his smile said he knew I was lying. That night, the cold in my limbs had deepened. The rifle rested on the table of my quarters, its surface faintly warm despite the chill. I could not shake the sensation that it was aware of me, of everything I was doing. I thought about the old man's warning, about the way the weapon seemed to know where to strike, and about Cora's quiet insistence that I leave. But every time I pictured walking away, I saw the faces of the people who had laughed when I bought it at the auction. I could not stomach the thought of giving them the ending they expected. The next day was a rest day in the tournament schedule, which meant the arena floor was closed and the promenade above was crowded with elites parading in their finest. I kept to the edges, but it did not matter. Celine's voice found me before I saw her. She appeared from behind a column, dressed in silver that caught the light like liquid. She moved with the confidence of someone who had never been told no in her life. She spoke plainly, saying she knew what the rifle was, knew the truth of its cost, and knew that sooner or later it would drain me dry. She said she could take it off my hands, store it somewhere safe, and ensure I lived long enough to enjoy the winnings I had already earned. When I asked why she wanted it, she gave me the kind of smile that was not an answer but an admission. She said weapons like that were wasted in the hands of men with no vision. I told her vision was overrated when it came with a body count. Her eyes flashed in a way that made me glad there were people around us. I left her standing there and headed for the maintenance levels again, needing the solitude. As I descended, the sounds of the promenade faded into the distant hum of the station's workings. I found myself in a storage bay lit only by strips along the floor. The quiet was broken by a faint scraping, and I turned to see one of the masked intruders from the other night stepping from behind a stack of crates. This one carried no weapon I could see. Instead, he spoke in a low voice, saying I had something that belonged to his employers. He offered no price, no threat, just a statement. I raised the rifle without thinking, and for the first time, it hesitated. The hum was still there, but the trigger felt heavier, as if the weapon was weighing the choice on its own. Then the man smiled, a flash of teeth in the dim light, and stepped back into the shadows, vanishing as silently as he had appeared. I stood there for a long moment, the weight of the rifle suddenly alien in my hands. It was becoming clear that every step I took deeper into this contest was also a step deeper into someone else's game. Cor wanted me out, Celine wanted me in her pocket, and the masked faction wanted the rifle back. And through all of it, the weapons seemed content to let the noose tighten. When I returned to my quarters, I found a data chip on the table that had not been there before. It contained a single recording, grainy and old, of the rifle being fired in some forgotten battle. The shot curved through smoke and debris, threading between soldiers, and struck a man who had been completely hidden behind a wall. The image froze on his face in the moment before the impact, his expression one of disbelief. The file ended there. No message, no explanation. That night I dreamed of the auction again, but this time when the old man whispered that I had no idea what I had bought, he stayed long enough to add that it had been looking for me. I woke with the rifle lying across my chest, though I had left it on the table before sleeping. My hands were clenched around the stock and The final arena was unlike anything the tournament had shown so far. It was not a series of separate courses or cleverly designed traps. It was a single sprawling battlefield suspended in the open frame of a space station orbiting a dying star. From the edge of the entry platform I could see the entire field stretching out in layers, jagged ridges of steel, shattered towers, molten rivers of coolant flowing between shattered bulkheads, and the central platform where the champion would wait. The air itself seemed thinner here, every breath tinged with the faint metallic taste of the star's radiation bleeding into the station's shields. Above, the stands were packed to breaking, the sound of the crowd a constant low thunder that pressed against my ribs. Even before the match began, I could feel the heat of their eyes, the anticipation of seeing the underdog finally crushed under the weight of expectation. The rules were simple enough to fit on a death notice. Make it to the champion. Take him down. Survive. The odds had been recalculated after every match, and mine had somehow slipped from a humiliating 2,000 to 1 to a still laughable, but no longer impossible 500 to 1. That meant people had started to believe, and belief in a place like this was dangerous. It made you a target long before the first shot. I felt the rifle on my shoulder, its heat seeping into my skin as if it were storing my heartbeat for later. I tried not to think about how many beats it might want. The gates opened with a sound like a deep breath being released. I stepped out onto the steel ridge, boots scraping against the worn metal. Across the battlefield, the champion emerged from a hatch in the central platform. Corvain moved with no rush, his armor gleaming under the harsh white lights, his presence as steady as the gravity that kept us all pinned here. He stopped in the center and raised his sword, a weapon as massive as it was unnecessary, because everyone here already knew he could kill with his bare hands. The crowd roared, and even from this distance I could see the faint smile tug at the corner of his mouth. The first wave of obstacles came not from the arena itself but from the swarm of automated sentries rising from the ground like angry insects. They scattered across the field, scanning for heat and movement. I dropped behind a section of collapsed wall just as the first barrage of plasma fire scorched the air above me. The heat flash was enough to make my teeth ache. I moved fast between cover, conserving my shots. The rifle thrummed in my grip, almost impatient, as if it wanted to fire whether I gave the order or not. When I finally lined up a shot on the nearest sentry, the round curved sharply mid-flight, slamming into its core. It went down in a shower of sparks, and the crowd's noise surged. But the victory came with the familiar cost. My breath itched, my hands trembled, and I felt the drain in my legs like sand slipping out of a broken hourglass. I kept moving, keeping low, letting other competitors draw the sentry's attention. Some fell quickly, others put up longer fights, but the swarm was relentless. The battlefield became a chaos of gunfire, explosions, and the hiss of molten coolant splashing onto steel. Twice I barely avoided a drone strike by diving behind cover that disintegrated under the impact. Halfway to the central platform, the arena shifted. Steel plates groaned as they tilted, entire sections of the battlefield breaking away to fall into the void below. The shift sent a tremor through the ground, and one competitor ahead of me lost his footing, tumbling into open space without even a scream. I leapt for a new section, landing hard and rolling to keep momentum. When I came up, I saw her, Lady Celine, in her private box above, watching through a lens again. She did not clap this time. She simply raised her glass in a silent toast, as if reminding me that no matter how this ended, she already had plans for me. The central platform loomed closer now, the path narrowing into a bridge of exposed girders. On either side, coolant rivers churned with lethal heat. The champion stepped forward, drawing the attention of every camera, every viewer in the galaxy. He waited, sword in hand, patient as a planet's rotation. I knew the trap here. He wanted me exhausted before I even reached him, and the arena was happy to oblige. The bridge swayed underfoot as automated turrets unfolded from its supports, spitting fire. I sprinted, weaving, the rifle kicking once, twice, each shot dropping a turret but leeching more of my strength. My vision narrowed until it felt like I was running through a tunnel of noise and heat. At last I stepped onto the champion's platform. The noise of the crowd receded into a kind of vacuum, the way a storm's center feels almost calm. Corvain lowered his sword slightly and studied me. He told me I should have taken his warning, that the rifle would not save me from what was about to happen. I told him I had not come here for saving. We circled, the space between us shrinking with each step. I could feel the rifle's hum rising, building like a held breath. The champion moved first, faster than I expected for a man in such heavy armor. His sword came down in a blur, and I barely rolled aside in time. The edge bit into the steel where I had been standing, leaving a molten scar. I fired once, aiming for a gap in his armor at the side, but he twisted and the round glanced away. He came at me again, and this time the impact of his blade against my rifle stock sent a jolt through my arms. The crowd roared at the clash, loving every second. My breathing grew ragged, the weight of the weapon heavier now, as though it were feeding on the fight itself. I realized I would not get more than one perfect shot in this state. My arms ached, my legs trembled, and my vision kept flickering at the edges. The champion pressed forward, relentless, driving me toward the edge of the platform. I feinted left, ducked under a swing, and dropped to one knee. The rifle came up in a single motion, my focus narrowing to the space between his breastplate and his helmet's base. Time seemed to slow, the crowd's roar fading into a dull hum. The trigger gave way under my finger, and the round left the barrel in a sharp flash of heat. It curved in the air, slipping past his guard, threading into that single gap. Corvain staggered, his sword lowering. He looked at me then, not with hatred, but with something that might have been relief. He thanked me, voice low enough that the crowd could not hear, and then he fell. The noise from the stands was like the collapse of a star. The announcer's voice tried to keep up with the chaos, shouting about the end of an era, the impossible victory. I stood there swaying, the rifle still warm in my hands, my lungs pulling in air like they were trying to make up for years of neglect. My body felt hollow, as though the shot had taken more than it should have. I could barely hear the medics calling my name over the sound of the crowd. As they led me from the platform, I glanced up at Celine's box. She was on her feet, applauding now, her smile wide and sharp. The look in her eyes was not admiration. It was possession. I knew she would come for the rifle again, and I knew I was in no shape to run. But for now, in this moment, I had done what no one else had. The champion had fallen, and the rusted rifle had kept its promise. The rest, whatever it was, would come soon enough. They took me off the platform on a stretcher that squeaked like it had stage fright while the crowd tried to tear the roof off the station with their noise. Someone pressed a bottle to my lips and someone else tried to shine a light in my eyes, and none of it mattered because every breath felt like it had to claw its way out of a hole. The rifle lay across my chest as if it refused to be anywhere else. I could feel it breathe. Not literally, not with lungs, but with that low warmth that had learned the rhythm of my pulse and now kept time with it. The medics traded numbers and clipped voices that meant trouble, and the announcer above kept shouting history and legacy and all the gilded words people use to make a killing sound like a holiday. Beside me, a figure matching my pace kept step without touching the stretcher. It took me a moment to realize it was Celine moving like a shadow that had decided to be helpful. She congratulated me in a voice so smooth it could have cut glass and suggested I consider a small private celebration, all discretion, all comfort, and perhaps a tiny discussion about rightful ownership. Her smile did not have edges, it had teeth. I told her I needed a doctor, which was true, and that I would meet her in an hour, which was not. The med bay was a clean rectangle of harsh lights and humming monitors. They tried to take the rifle from me and it made a small sound, a thrum that was almost a warning, and my hands tightened around it on their own. The doctor who had patched me earlier leaned over me with a frown that looked permanent, and said I had markers he did not like. My blood pressure was a rumor, my heart rate leaped around like a song it could not remember, and my cells showed stress patterns he usually saw in miners from hard gravity wells. He asked again about stimulants, and I told him I had not touched anything and that he would not believe me if I told him what I had touched. He gave me a bag of fluids and a stern look and said if I kept this up, the next match would be with a cardiologist. I thanked him because he had meant well. When the room emptied for a minute I slid off the cot and found my boots like a thief returning to a scene he had never left. The corridor outside was busy with triumph and repair. Techs rolled carts of parts and medics triaged broken ambition. Down at the end a private door led to the Victory Promenade where the nobles toasted and the rich rehearsed their speeches about merit. I took the opposite direction, into service tunnels where the air smelled like old lightning and the lights hum when you look away. The rifle pulsed against my palm and I felt steadier, or perhaps I only felt more used to the unsteadiness. In a blind turn I ran into a wall that moved and discovered it was Corvain on a gurney surrounded by quiet men who wore the blank faces of people paid to be furniture. He was not dead. Not yet. His eyes were open and clear, and if pain had visited him it had left politely. He saw the rifle first, then me. He thanked me again for finishing what he could not end himself. His voice was softer than I expected, a piano in a room of engines. He said the champion had always been a job and the job had become a cage, and the cage had become a crown. He said he had bought lives with his victories and lost his own in installments. I told him I was sorry. He said do not be, then added that the people who ran this pageant would not forgive what I had done to their favorite story, and that they would come looking for the quill that had written the new ending. He looked at the rifle the way a man looks at a storm on the horizon and said it would not forgive me either. I wanted to ask him what forgiveness had to do with machines. He coughed a laugh and closed his eyes, and the furniture men moved him away like a monument being taken to storage. Celine was waiting for me in the first place I should not have gone. The promenade smelled like ozone and rare flowers and the kind of perfume only money can afford. Her bodyguards stood at discreet distances that would become very close the instant I decided to be impolite. She gestured to a table laid with things I could not pronounce and said eat, drink, be convinced. I remained standing. She spoke quickly now, the gloss stripped, the engine underneath revealed. She wanted the rifle. She would buy it or bless it into my keeping under her terms. There would be a stipend, a staff, a ring of protection, and a series of obligations described in delicate words that all meant obedience. When I asked what she planned to do with a weapon that poisons its owner, she said she had no intention of owning it, not in the pedestrian sense. She would place it where it could be useful, which is the prettiest euphemism in the galaxy for the ugliest work. She added that if I refused, there were other ways to extract compliance. The smile returned, light glancing off water. I asked for a walk. She let me have it, perhaps because she thought a man in my condition would not get far. Perhaps because she wanted to see if I would lead her to the solution on my own. I took a lift that climbed the spine of the station, past the luxury decks and the crew decks and the cargo rings, up to the maintenance ring that sat like a halo near the shield emitters. Out here the star filled the view like an accusation, all furious light and dying strength. The glare cut the world into hard lines and deep shadows. The winds of the station whispered through the ducts with a secret keeper's patience. Celine arrived half a minute after me, wrapped in a heat cape that made her look like a comet that had learned manners. She did not pretend to be angry about being dragged to a drafty scaffold above a lethal sky. She leaned on the rail and studied the star and waited. I told her a tale because people who have everything still crave a good story. I spoke of the First War, and the 7 wicked toys forged by minds who thought consequence was an error message. I told her about the cost that came due with every shot and about the way the weapon hummed when it was pleased and the way it cooled when it wanted to sulk. I said I was tired and my bones felt hollowed and that I was considering retiring early from a career I had never chosen. She listened as if I were the city, and she was deciding where to put the new river. Then she said that it did not matter how tired I was. I had done something the galaxy would not forget, and that put me on a map I could not erase. She said I would either let her turn me into a legend that behaved, or I would be turned into a warning that behaved even better. For a moment I thought about saying yes because survival is a temptation that visits even the stubborn. Then the rifle warmed in a way that felt like a whisper near my ear and I remembered the masked men, the 2 clean officers, the way the weapon had moved from the table to my arms while I slept, the way it had offered me a very particular mercy only when it decided I had earned it. I stepped nearer to the rail and looked at the star and imagined a clean end of bright heat and honest physics. Celine took a single step closer, and her bodyguards took 3 in the same direction. I lifted the rifle. The heat from the star soaked into the metal until it became hard to tell which warmth belonged to which. Then I pitched it outward. It spun, a dark line against the glare, and fell toward the shields. The emitters flared and the sound that came out of them was like a chorus only machines could sing. The rifle struck.